late last week, PSA sent out an email to their customer base saying that they weren't going to be grading 2023 Donruss Optic football, mainly because the checklist wasn't available yet. And I think as we wind down our time with Panini having the license for football and basketball, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of this type of thing where they just don't come out with checklists. All the things that they were doing with these products to make sure that the consumer experience was good, I think that, I don't know good, I think necessarily, but I think things like this, where it's like the checklist coming up beforehand, things maybe even coming out on time, potentially, I think that we're going to see more issues like this, potentially. I don't know, and I hope that Panini doesn't go down this route, but just based on what they're doing now, I don't know. That's just how I see the end of their era within having the licenses going, if I'm going to be honest, because, Optic football is, I think, one of the bigger base products just in general for Panini, whether it's for football or for basketball. I would say Optic, it's probably, it's definitely in the top 5 in terms of most important product. I think Prism, probably number 1. But again, I think Prism is going to be studied in a way that Prism, I wouldn't even call it the downfall of Prism necessarily, but the highs and lows of how popular Prism was and what Panini just decided to do, where they really were just like, oh, this is everyone's favorite product. We're just going to print so much of it that we're going to print so much of it after maybe not printing as much for so long that, again, it just... I use the word rug pull loosely a little bit, just based on, because that's happened within the NFT world and crypto world where everything gets so hyped up and then out of nowhere, which again, I don't think it's necessarily exactly the same comparison using that term, like where the rug pull, it's the crypto or the NFT gets so hyped up and then the people who created it or the people that were promoting it sell it as soon as other people buy it. I don't necessarily think that's what happened with Prism, but I would consider this in a similar type of category where for so long Prism was the most popular product for football, for basketball, mainly for basketball. But it was the most popular product and everyone loved it, and it just became more and more popular. And as the popularity grew, the print run grew, and the quality control grew or decreased. And then this year, obviously we have issue with those top quarterbacks not being in there. And I would say that, I don't know, the checklist, I bet you, I feel like the reason they haven't come out with the checklist is probably has something to do with Anthony Richardson, if I'm going to be honest, because PSA also for a while, and I haven't seen any statement from them coming out about this recently, but like they weren't grading any Anthony Richardson autographs because there was suspicion that he didn't sign the cards himself. So that could be the reason why I think the checklist is delayed, which I don't know. The checklist is just like, it almost should just be like a given that it make sure that it has to come out beforehand. Because also the weird thing is, like, how can they sell a product without the checklist? So, like, if there's no checklist available, how are they allowed to try and sell this product to anybody, any distributors, any hobby shops, if these people that are buying the product don't have the checklist and they don't know what's inside of the product? Like, how are they even allowed? Like, it should be almost something where, from a business perspective, they shouldn't be allowed to try and sell it. But I think we're in such a strange industry that the regulations of the industry have not been created, and I don't know if they're ever going to be created, because I don't know how they would even, I don't know where you'd even start or who would even be spearheading any type of regulations to make sure that companies are doing things correctly, which coming out with a checklist is not even that, it shouldn't be that confusing or hard for them. It should be something where, like I said, it's just a given. If they're trying to sell this product to distributors, it should be first and foremost, like, here's what's inside the product. And we obviously know that for football, there's no Bryce Young, Will Levis, there's no CJ Stroud autographs. Those, because they signed those exclusives with Fanatics, which, again, it just feels like the exclusive that those quarterbacks signed with Fanatics, which I feel like this is maybe obvious if you've been watching any of the business moves that Fanatics has been making. It feels like those business moves to get those quarterbacks was really not even to enhance their product, but to, what would be the opposite of enhance? Not dehance, but it would be to decrease the production or decrease the value of Panini football products, because, you know, as most of us know, the quarterback is king in the NFL, and that probably is that may never change. I thought there could have been a shift, but I think at this point it's safe to say that there's a chance that that may never change. And what Fanatics has done as they've grown and as they become more of a staple within sports cards is that they've shown that they're going to be willing to make moves to devalue a company and help them from a business perspective of acquiring whatever, which, I don't know. I mean, I guess you can give it up to Panini here for not selling to Fanatics, like, to being like, no, we're not going to, we're not going to go off into the night and, we're not going to just sell for the highest price or whatever to Fanatics. Like, I don't think necessarily Topps did that, but I think when they were going to go public, they looked at the deal that Fanatics was going to give them, and they said the money that Fanatics was going to give them clearly must have been higher than what they were going to be able to get from going on to, like, the stock market, because when they were going to go public. Also, they lost a bunch of the licenses, and Fanatics was out here buying the licenses. So, those were some of the business moves that Fanatics was making to show what they're trying to do within this industry. And I think Fanatics has done a fine job with their checklists. But I don't know. Again, I think another issue you're going to run into here is probably the redemptions. I just don't know how they can sell redemptions within this product and not really do any updating ever. Like, we've never really seen, like, a product come out and they're just like, here are the redemptions that are in the product. I think Topps has done a fine job. Like, this year I have not seen as many. I feel like in the past we've seen more big cards get pulled as redemptions. I feel like that's not something we've seen in the past year or so, which is something that Fanatics has said they're going to try and do, is get rid of redemptions altogether, which, again, like I've said in the past, I think that's a phenomenal idea. I think you really got to do that to, at least for the base autographs. Like, some of the bigger cards, I think it's fine to do redemptions for stuff like the rookie patch cards, because I just think that those are, high value cards that Fanatics is trying to keep in the best condition they can. So putting them into packs doesn't really make much sense. They did that with some of the I think there was a breaker style product that they came out with that had those cards in it, but for the other base product releases for Topps Chrome, they only put in redemptions. They didn't put in the actual cards. So for this checklist, PSA said they're not going to grade, which I feel like that's obvious, because if they don't have a checklist, they don't know what card numbers each of the cards are, and that makes sense, I think, overall. So, maybe this is going to be a kick in the butt for Panini to just lock in a little bit here. Like, I understand the summer's coming up and all of these things, but it's like you still have products that are coming out this year from last year, which, again, I hate that they haven't figured out the schedule, which they're not going to now, obviously, I think, because of the licensing. But at least keep the consumer experience good, and don't make people have to like figure it out, because that also could be something where PSA has done that in the past, and now they're just looking at it and saying, no, we're just not going to grade this product until we get the checklist, because maybe in the past they've had to construct the checklist almost maybe by people sending in cards, and now PSA is putting their foot down and saying, if you don't send us a checklist, we are not going to be doing the work that you should be doing by... You should be doing the work by putting out this checklist. We're not going to do the work by grading these cards and almost creating a secondary checklist because you are either too lazy or you just aren't going to put out the information that's important for grading and for people who are buying and selling the product. There are going to be tons of sports card documentaries, or there should be, at least, I guess. Maybe I'm prefacing this by saying there are going to be, like I know that there are going to be. There should be. I think that there should be documentaries about cards, and I think what has happened on social media nowadays, again, it's a love-hate thing, as you probably have heard me talk about with social media in general. But something that I will always say about sports cards is that it has done a lot of good for bringing stories to light within the card industry that otherwise probably wouldn't have gotten much traction. The industry, I think, is still in a very early stage of like content being created. I think there are so many different people that do great jobs. I mean, I think we're obviously in that category of people who are documenting the hobby and doing a really cool thing at, writing blogs and all of these things. But I still think just overall, the industry of media within sports cards is still in a very infant state. I think the example that I think it was Gary Vee, I'm pretty sure, always used, or I think it was him. It sounds like something that he would say, may or may not have been, but he was saying something about how something about, in his talks about something being in like the second or third inning, using that as an example. And that's an example. That's kind of what I would say about cards back in 2020, 2021, 2022. I think we were still in the early stages when it comes to media, just in general. I think that, media is still in a very early state as well. And all that to be said, sorry, I think I'm losing the point here of what we're going to be talking about on today's podcast. The 1/1 Jason Dominguez Topps Platinum rookie card has been graded, and it got a PSA 10. But the whole point of the story here is that the story of this card is actually very cool. It has a very interesting backstory. It was pulled actually at a Phillies game, and the person just like pulled it out of a Topps pack, and like they posted on, I think it was the Sports Card Nonsense page, like, okay, so what do we think this is going to be? How much do we think this is going to cost? And also, how do I get this card out of here? Like, I don't even, in that scenario, I don't really know what you do. Like, I guess you probably have to leave the field. Like, this is like, and I think because Jason Dominguez also hasn't played this year yet, because last year he was, he had to get Tommy John surgery, which I didn't even realize this, if I'm going to be completely honest, until I started looking it up, and I was like, well, he hasn't really played in that many games. Like, what's going on here? And then I was like, oh, that's right. He got injured at the end of last season after he made his debut, so that's why he was in these cards this year and was kind of one of the main marketing people, I think, being used. And he hasn't really played yet. I think there was a video actually recently that came out about him, and I don't know if these are all intertwined, potentially. I don't know, because like I said, this news story came out about the card being graded, and then the other day I saw him reacting to somebody asked him a question about what his most expensive sports card sale was, and he kind of knew, like, which I thought that was kind of interesting. And that actually, I even thought that maybe I could turn that concept into an episode of like just talking about like players on social media knowing, because that is, that's what I've talked about like contracts and stuff like that with Fanatics and players getting more equity because they're tracking these cards and what they're selling for. So like I said, it's weird that it all kind of came out all sort of in the past like week or two. Yeah. And like I said, I don't know if it was a marketing thing or if it was just for some reason, it was just a coincidence. Probably just a coincidence, realistically, that I saw the video and then this came out. But so the 1/1 gets graded. It was pulled at the game, which is like, again, these stories that are on social media that we wouldn't be able to see if, we just wouldn't even, like, sure, the card would have got graded, but we probably wouldn't have even known the backstory about the card if social media didn't exist. So again, I think it's a love-hate thing. I think there's cool stuff, great stuff that happens on social media. I think, like, finding topics for shows, it's not necessarily gotten harder, but I think a lot less. Twitter in general has turned into a place where it's harder to find the information that you're looking for, in my opinion. But this one, and then this is kind of the other piece of it. So when PSA tweets out that the card got a PSA 10, they replied to a tweet that Topps actually put out talking about this story. So it's kind of, there's almost layers to this here where we're just seeing a lot of cool stuff happen within kind of the everything having to do with this card. Now, I guess the question is really going to be like, how does it sell? Because I think we're past the point where Dominguez, you could really buy and sell him off of hype. I think like I said, he's still hurt right now, but he's doing rehab assignments. But I think you're probably past the point of buying and selling off hype with Dominguez. Like, you probably could sell again. There's probably going to be a little bit of an increase in his card prices when they announce that he's going to be making his season debut again. And being on the Yankees, this is something that I think people have argued for basically since his card came out, is like, what do the value of some of the teams that you're playing for have, or what will they have on cards? And I think Dominguez is a good example of a fan base getting, one of the biggest sports fan bases in the world getting one of the most popular prospects, in the world. I guess in the world. I mean, the MLB is probably the top league in the world. Probably the Japan League is also in that conversation. But either way, this was the same thing that happened, and I think that actually would have been the same year with Zion if he had gone to the Knicks. Like, that would have been crazy. And I don't know. It's obviously, there's no way to go back and see what would have happened, but I would have really liked to see the mania that would have been created with Zion on the Knicks rather than the Pelicans. And I don't know. It really, he's had kind of an unfortunate career. Zion has, at least. And I guess it's prospecting in general. Even if a player, I just think it's hard. It's prospecting modern cards. If you're trying to buy for the long term, I think at this point you really shouldn't be doing that. You should be looking at, if it's the MLB, you should be looking at when the player is going to be getting called up, and then when they're going to be making their debut. That's one of the better times to sell. I think with Dominguez, it's interesting because he played a little bit last year, and he's kind of going to be reintroduced, like, as a prospect here, because he's going to be making his debut again this season, which relatively soon. Because if he's making rehab starts or rehab assignments, that's a step in the right direction for him. And maybe it could be even part of, like, a marketing campaign that PSA does here. Like, if, I think the pipeline within sports cards is going to be a very interesting, like, the sharing of different companies' content, I guess, is maybe the point here. Like, if this card gets sold through Golden, or if it's maybe, or eBay potentially. I mean, I would imagine it'll be one of those platforms, like probably Golden, but it's like the pipeline from big card pulled, sent to PSA, sold on Golden, feels like it's a pretty common pipeline within cards right now. And I don't know if any other company would really be able to replicate that, like, and making things as seamless as possible. Like, if you were to go back in time and tell people that things were going to be this seamless, I mean, for myself, I would have been like, well, yeah, I think that's kind of how it should be, like, with the buying and selling of cards and doing things all within, like, just an online platform, basically. It's really opening up another avenue for people to enjoy cards. Obviously, people who are maybe more traditionalists, they want the cards. Like, they don't want the cards to be online. Like, so that is one thing that I think people will probably look at and say there's been positives and negatives to the rise of the streamlined sports card enjoyment, I guess. I don't know if that's exactly the right terminology there, but like the start to finish, how you can be involved in sports cards has changed from, in the 80s, 90s, where eBay wasn't even around, So to get it go and the process becomes streamlined. And again, this is where I think the information is important. Social media is important. Learning as much as you can about the industry is just as important as trying to go out and find some of these products to buy and sell. And within social media, we are seeing that these stories are being used as marketing material. Again, it's you know, the use of the cards for PSA and Topps, I think, is just the use of the cards that are being graded and being produced by these companies being used in their marketing materials, along with everybody else posting about it. Again, it's really a crazy process that they've been able to kind of maneuver this marketing world and been able to get so much of this free advertising. Like with this card, it's going to get tons of publicity, probably because it's the one of one, and then especially once he, you know, gets into playing a little bit more and all of these things, we should probably start to see more of those cards. Like, I think the other big card for him is going to be the Topps Chrome debut patch, because I believe since he's a rookie this year, that means his debut patch is going to be in this year's Topps Chrome, not last year when he made the debut and he wore the patch. I don't know. Again, I wish there was a way to change the schedule, but at this point, I don't think there will be. But the card, I guess we'll also see, is it going to be sold through Golden? Will the person maybe not sell it and they just want to grade it? I mean, if that card comes back at PSA 10, that's a phenomenal grade. And if there's still a lot of hype around Dominguez, I mean, it could be at over 10,000. Could it be over 100,000 potentially? I don't really know, but I think we're going to see the card probably sell just based on how we've seen this happen kind of in the past, where big cards get graded by PSA. They tweet out that they grade them, and then they get sold instantly through Golden. So I would potentially understand if that's what's going to happen with this card, but we'll see over the next few weeks if that's actually the case. Yesterday, ComC put out their data from the past, week or so. And they do this, I think, most weeks, I'm pretty sure. I know that I don't see it every week, so I'm not sure if they do it every week, but I feel like I do see it most weeks. But, you know, obviously with the algorithm and social media, sometimes things don't end up showing up, or things do show up more often than not, and sometimes they don't. It's an odd system. But either way, so ComC puts out this data, top 4 sports: baseball, basketball, football, hockey, and then the top 5 players from each of those sports. And usually, sometimes when I cover this stuff on the podcast, I'll go through each I'll go through each sport and each list on the sport. And I think I'm going to do it a little bit differently today. I kind of want to just cover the overall thoughts on all of the lists, because the top 4 for each sport, I will go into top 4 for each sport, because I think that is part of the context of this. So basketball, LeBron James; baseball, Shohei Ohtani; hockey, Connor McDavid; and then football is Patrick Mahomes. And I would argue that those are probably, for each of those sports, those are probably the most important players for each of those sports, if I'm going to be honest. I think you could say any of them are number 1. I would say that McDavid's definitely number 1 in hockey. Ohtani is probably number 1 in baseball. Patrick Mahomes, I think you could argue a couple different players, but I would say Patrick Mahomes, since he's just coming off the Super Bowl, probably number 1. And then LeBron, maybe not the best player in the league, but still probably the most important. So what that gets into now, I think, is that I think if you are buying and selling, this is important data that you should be looking at. That marketplaces, I think the data that marketplaces are putting out is some of the most important data for sellers that you could find. Because I think you can do this data yourself, probably by going to either Card Ladder or the Sports Card Investor platform. I'm sure that they have some sort of data like this, but you're kind of trying to figure out the data and you don't really know what you're looking for, maybe potentially, unless once you get going, then you might you might figure out what you're looking for after doing it a couple times. But this is Check Out My Cards putting out the data that these are the players that had the most sales. And I think going forward, if you are, whether you're a shop or you're buying and selling online, I would say that those 4 players, and even maybe, basketball, Luka was number 2. But Luka's, obviously still in the playoffs here. And the other players, well, McDavid obviously still in the playoffs, still in the, I think they're in the conference finals for hockey. Football's not going on. Or all the off-season stuff is going on. And I talked about the schedule and how I think they do a really good job with it, but there's no games going on. And then with baseball, I don't know. I think Ohtani he's probably going to be in these lists for quite some time in terms of players who are most bought and sold on platforms. And the data is proving that. I think these are the hottest players. And even LeBron, I think, it's a very interesting list for basketball, which that was the one that probably surprised me the most. I mean, you got pretty much a combination of, it was LeBron and then Luka and then Anthony Edwards, then Steph Curry, and then Jason Tatum, which don't get me started. Don't get me started on the stuff I've been seeing about the Celtics. I know that they're doing it on purpose. I know that the media, whether it's Fox Sports or ESPN, they're putting out narratives of what they think is going to get people to watch. Which, if you're from the Boston area and you listen to Boston sports radio, this is Boston sports coverage 101. Just say you don't like the team, and you're going to get people to watch because people are going to be infuriated. Because, again, like I said, don't get me started. Celtics in the finals, though, so that's good. But Jason Tatum, number 5 there. The rest of the list, the 2 players, Edwards, Luka, in the playoffs. Depending on what happens in the game, I think it's probably going on still right now. But then, like I said, you still have LeBron and Steph Curry on that list, even though, neither of them. Okay, actually, so it looks like the Timberwolves did win. I just looked it up. So they're both still in. I would expect. I don't know. I would expect one of those players to overtake LeBron probably next week in these types of statistics. But I think it just shows how important LeBron is to the NBA and just the NBA marketing in general, because it's like he hasn't been in the playoffs for so long. And Steph Curry barely, they didn't even make it. So you look at those 2 players and they didn't even make a far run or a run at all, and they're still so high on the list. And I do think sometimes the lists, I don't know, they could be skewed in a way, because you do have to look at and this is kind of the other piece of this conversation in general, is the difference between how many modern cards are selling versus how many, I mean, you could even say early 2010s, 2011s, how many cards there even just were in general versus how many cards there are now, and then kind of comparing those two. And I wonder if there's because it's not I guess it would be almost a volume metric where it's how many cards there are versus how many cards are selling. And again, these are pieces of data that I would love to see, but I'm sure we never will. We'll never know how many basketball cards or how many LeBron cards were produced in any given year. So we'll never really have this data. But just based on the eye test, there's way more cards being produced now than there were in the early 2000s, or more like the 2010s, because once we got into the mid 2000s, that's when things slowed down a little bit. Then LeBron kind of comes into the league, and then you get into the 2010s, which Steph Curry was 2009. But either way, I still think that those numbers, that's the metric that I would like to know for LeBron, which I think LeBron is he is probably more in the boat of modern players than Steph Curry is, and just in terms of how many cards there were, because LeBron's rookie, there were tons of different Topps rookies you could buy. They were all licensed. Steph Curry is in that weird time period where Panini and Topps were kind of half making basketball cards, and neither of them Prism hadn't been released yet, so they were in between eras of when a certain company was taking over and really increasing the volume, but they're both still on this list. So, and I think that's probably from inserts and stuff, but like I said, I think that also gets into the fact to show that if you are buying and selling, LeBron and Steph Curry are still very viable, even though they're not in the playoffs. And I don't know, I guess I'd be interested to see who would round out the top 10 there. Like, I wouldn't even be surprised if, like, a player like Zion or Ja was on that list still. Because when you look at, like, top graded cards and how many of those cards there are, there's so many of them that, like, I'm sure, Zion is going to be someone that I will say I probably will do a lot of episodes about, or at least a couple, honestly, this offseason, because I'm telling you what, I think that this next season for him is probably going to be the most important season of his career, because last season was really the first full season that he played, and then literally couldn't play in the play-in game to get into the playoffs because he got injured in like the last game of the season. It really was a very odd situation, but again, he's a prospect that I think people are going to get really excited about, that you probably, and it's crazy to even call him a prospect this point. He'll be going into his 5th NBA season, but I think you understand the point that I'm trying to make here, is that people are going to get excited about Zion making his, return and playing a full healthy season and all this important stuff, or he could get traded, and that also would be a totally throw another wrench into this conversation. But with basketball, with the other sports, I think this data, the top fives, because you're going to find players that maybe you didn't realize people were buying and selling, and you're going to see that those players are, just as important as maybe some that you were buying and selling and you didn't realize that maybe you bought a bunch of cards and they weren't selling because for, whatever reason, you just couldn't sell those cards. But this type of data will show you, or at least point you in a different direction to show you where maybe some of the buying and selling is going on compared to, if you're doing your own type of research. 2 pieces of Panini news, and I don't know. They're good, not good. I guess it'll really be to be determined here, because the first thing, this one's a little bit. They're both topics are probably about the same length. The first one here is that PSA finally revealed that they got the checklist for Donruss football. And, they got it. I don't know. Maybe I waited too long to make the podcast, because I think I just talked about that last week. Like, it was either Wednesday. It had to have been either Thursday or Friday, or even it could have been Monday. I don't remember. I don't remember which day I talked about it, but it was like within the past week. And yeah, I don't know. Panini, maybe they're listening to the podcast, maybe they probably not, but they did. In theory, I came out with a podcast, and they responded by coming out with the checklist, giving it to PSA. Yeah. Good, fine. You did what you're supposed to. I'm not necessarily sitting here giving Panini points or excitement because they did what they were supposed to. Hopefully this doesn't keep happening. So far, maybe this is just the first time that we've heard it from PSA. Maybe behind the scene. No, because people have gotten football cards graded this year, so there's no way that they just haven't been grading football cards all year. So this is just maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a mistake, whatever. But they fixed it. They gave them the checklist. That's great. The other piece of news that, I'll get into this other piece of news and I'll kind of try and relate the two, is that we are coming up on another big basketball release, which is Optic Basketball. I would say Optic is, I would maybe argue it's number 2. In the past, I would say Select would have been in that conversation. Optic, Prism. And then from there, you can kind of... Hoops, I think, is in that conversation. Again, I think we basically can all agree that Prism is number 1. Number 2, I think you could argue for a couple different products. Optic, I would say right now, is considered number 2. And I don't, it's like Select. Select was one of my favorite products, if I'm going to be honest. It was just one of my favorite, it was one of my favorite products to do research on back in the day. And then when Panini decided to put it into retail, that was one of... look, within the sports card industry, we're not necessarily big enough to make 30 for 30s, but like I just think Panini putting select basketball and football into retail deserves some sort of 30 for 30 documentary, deserves some sort of documentary of just like the outrage and that they just did it. They just came out with it. Oh my God. That was one of the best products Select was. I would say it was maybe number 2. It was definitely in the top 3. But then Panini did what no one was asking for. No one was asking for more. No one was really asking for more Select. I think everyone that was getting Select liked how much there was, which I think is an interesting concept for Panini, because Panini out of Topps or Panini before the past like year or so, I would say Panini probably had one of the best social media reposting strategies from any of the companies, because Panini really just reposted almost anything anybody that was tagging Panini that was like positive, they were just reposting on Instagram. So they had some very interesting data that I wish that they had maybe used to point them in a better direction here, because I would say nobody was tagging Panini, be like, we need to get it in retail. The fact that it was hobby only really just added a little bit. It added a little bit and kind of made it stand out from the crowd. And I think within sports cards nowadays, that's where I see products being successful and successful brands being created, is if they can come out with a product but give people a way to maybe look forward to the product is sort of one way you could phrase it, but set it apart from, because if you look at Select now compared to Optic or compared to Prism, it's just like every other product. And I think even Prism to an extent had that sort of thing happen to it, where I don't know, because it never was a hobby versus retail thing for Prism, but it just seemed like Prism for some reason was like harder to get. And so when these products become not hard to get at all, it takes away something from the release. A little bit of an excitement. Like the last Prism release that I was really excited for was Zion and Ja's year. I went out and I went to my hobby shop, which I still, at that time, it may even sound crazy, I was still able to go to a hobby shop and buy one of the retail blasters at a hobby shop for $35, which, I mean, those got up to like $250 if you remember, which is to pay $250 for a Zion and Ja Prism blaster. It's crazy. It's crazy that was really a time period within cards. Again, $250 is too much for a blaster. Like, come on, what are we doing here? But with Optic, and then the Donruss or Optic football, and then also the football that Panini's decides to grade, it really boggles my mind that Fanatics was able to take all of the top autographed people from this product, from Panini. Like, they took Wembanyama, they took all those quarterbacks in the NFL. It is really, I think, shows that Fanatics is like a business-oriented company. Like, and that may, if you're a company, you'd say, well, yeah, obviously, if you're business-oriented, that's probably a good thing. But, like, business in the sense that they will do anything to get competitors out of their way. Because you could say that that's what happened with Topps in a way. Like, they took what was Topps' biggest asset, but they also then were able to buy Topps. Now, with Panini and with these other players, they took out, instead of taking the whole license, they did end up taking, well, actually, that's the other thing. They did end up taking the license as well. Eventually, they'll be getting these licenses. But they also took, for the next year or two, what are going to be the best players. Now, getting Caitlin Clark, I think, was actually a really brilliant, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, I think actually were two really, not underrated gets for Panini, but like, if they had let those players go, then there would have been some real Panini would have some real rough times coming up if they weren't able to secure those two players within the WNBA, because this year they are really just they just don't have the autographs, which for retail products the autographs are important, but for hobby and also then just the bigger autograph products, like National Treasures, there's going to be no National Treasures RPAs for any of those players. And I would bet you this year, actually, now that I'm saying this, I bet you that Panini is going to come out with a WNBA National Treasures. Yeah, they're definitely going to do that, because the fact that they're missing out on Wembanyama and then the other three rookies in football, they're going to need to figure out a way to do something here. I think that they will probably come out with a WNBA National Treasures product. I think that would be a pretty cool one. I mean, the one-of-one logo RPA for Caitlin Clark, I don't know. I don't even know what that would go for. And we're going to see the card, most likely, just from the fact that they need to recoup some of the losses that they have gotten from losing some of these players. Now, are they going to be able to make a comeback? I guess we'll see. But maybe those other moves that Fanatics made are going to be the moves that turn into Panini being sold to Fanatics. I don't really know. It seems like Panini's not going to go out. Maybe they're going to go out swinging. I think potentially they're going to come out with a ton of cards over the next few years. But as long as they're not doing this thing that they did with the football product. And just not come out with stuff I don't know. Hopefully, like I said, the news has changed and these cards can now be graded. Hopefully, this isn't the case with any of these other basketball products, because if Panini just goes out with a whimper, that would kind of be unfortunate. I don't know if we're going to see that, but some of the news is products are starting to finally, in a way, come out for this year's basketball and football class. There are two things that I've seen on social media in the past week that I thought were pretty interesting that I want to talk about on today's podcast. They're kind of similar, I think, at least. One has been the rise in Topps posting about, on Twitter specifically, that's where I'm getting this information. The rise of Topps posting about big cards being pulled out of retail, and this is something that I've seen Topps do, but then I've seen multiple people kind of questioning why is Topps promoting retail so much more than hobby boxes or hobby just in general? Because I don't know, it's two things here. So it's one is people are questioning whether retail is better than hobby for your buy, and is Topps trying to get more people to buy retail versus hobby, or is the fact that they're promoting retail products over hobby products, is that because they're trying to sell more retail, or is it because that retail maybe just for whatever reason better? Because I don't think I've seen Topps promote in the opposite way. I don't think Topps has come out with any types of posts that are oh, can you believe that this card was pulled, and then mentioned it's from a hobby box? Which I guess it's kind of you don't, I don't know. That's probably a type of content that maybe doesn't do well. So that's also where I think, maybe there isn't a difference, and Topps is just posting about retail versus hobby, and that's just because they know that saying that something came out of a retail box is going to do better numbers on social media potentially. The other piece of this that I think is very interesting was, Sports Card Dad posted a very good video today, actually, or I guess it would have been yesterday, but he posted a very good video that I watched where he was talking about the rise in repacks, which I think we've seen many breakers do repack products, and that was sort of the point. It was are breakers moving towards repacks because they don't have control over the breaks that they're doing, versus they do have control versus what, or sorry, I think I said versus 3 times. They do have control of what they put in a repack product, so they're going to be able to retain customers a little bit better, because, you know, some of the points that he brought up were like, if you're a breaker, how do you, you know, if you have a loyal customer, you have a customer base, and for weeks or months potentially, the customer base goes without, you know, pulling anything really substantial, you're kind of running into an issue where some of them might just move on to a different breaker, or they might just stop breaking altogether. If you're doing the repacks, you have the ability to, you know, put in a bunch of random cards, or you have the ability to put in good cards into the repacks just in general. So that's, I think that they are tied there in a way, because I don't know, I'm not sure. And again, these are stuff that I'm seeing on social media, so maybe this is what I've talked. The narrative of what happens on social media is not always necessarily what is happening in real life, because people can just say whatever they want on the internet with basically no repercussions. So it's really, I don't know. It is a representation of what's going on, but it's not. I think that there's maybe better ways to get a representation of what's going on, but at the same time, I don't know if, you know, because it is what the people are talking about, but on one hand, it's what people are talking about. On the other hand, people like to lie on social media. So I think it's taking it with a grain of salt. And I don't know. It's because the other point that's all part of this is the fact that within sports cards, breaking and repacks, I think they're both in the same conversation here. All it is just gambling with like somebody who is speaking on stream. And I also wonder if that concept is good or bad, because, you know, when it comes to online gambling, in some scenarios, depending on where you're gambling, you will have somebody who is running the real game. Like, it's not just a simulation of the game. Because, you know, I've done some online gambling with BetDSI is like the company that, like old, you know, it's a European website that I've used for a while, but like it's just a simulation. It's just a game. It's not really like if you're playing roulette, you're not actually like in some casinos or some online casinos, you actually are playing with somebody who is throwing the ball and rolling and spinning the wheel. So with this scenario, you are gambling, but you have somebody behind the gambling, behind the screen, who is kind of commentating and being a personality behind these breaks. And it does make me wonder the not the increase, but not even the rise. I'm trying to think of the exact word, but like the concept that a person is gambling with just like they're gambling, there's somebody on the other end doing, you know, roulette or cards or whatever, but they're just doing it. Like, they're not, and it could be similar with sports cards. And I think the other good piece that I talked about, and when he said this on his video, I was like, thank you, finally someone else is like talking about this that I've seen. The rise in prices, but also the rise in production for these companies has gotten, I don't know, I don't want to say out of control, but it's gotten to a point where it's like the sports card companies are, I don't want to say that they're ruining breaking and opening up boxes, but they're making it really hard for people to, you know, because I think in the past you did have a self-sustaining economy there with people being able to open boxes or do breaks, and they were able to get the cards and then sell the cards, where now you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, if I'm going to be honest, when it comes to a lot of these breaks. And I think that's why, you know, if Sports Card Dad, if he's talking about the rise in repacks, I think it's good and bad, because I think the repacks in general, if you have a breaker who is doing it well, you know, and not scamming anybody, because that's the one thing that I get the most nervous of when it comes to repacks is just scams. Like, if my suggestion for anybody who's getting into repacks, if there's no checklist
online, then don't don't enter the repack, like, or I don't know. I mean, I hate to say, you know, if someone makes a mistake, to say that hurts their, you know, overall legacy within the cards. But it's like, if someone has scammed a bunch of times and you're entering repacks and you get scammed, it's like, well, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you, I think is the saying. If somebody has been scamming and they do it consistently, and I think that's another piece of it, is that there was another Whatnot scammer that kind of did some stuff that people were like, hey, what the hell's going on here, Whatnot? I don't know. There's, like I said, the reality of social media I fall into sometimes, where it's like some things I see and I'm like, wow, that's really crazy, but then you take 2 seconds to look into the thing and it's like, oh, well, this just is that the thing that person said is just not correct, and they're farming engagement, or they're just saying things because they know that it's going to get engagement of their audience, which maybe, like I said, that's what maybe Topps is doing here with saying that certain cards are coming out of retail. And like I said, I don't know, you know, I don't know what's real and what's not sometimes when it comes to social media. Like in this scenario, like, I don't know if it's real that retail has just been crushing, and like, or if Topps has done anything to change retail, because also it's like, I'm sure you're going to find hundreds of people every single day who are posting about pulling a great card. And this is sort of the free marketing also that I've talked about. It's like Topps getting free marketing from people posting about how they did well in a box or they did well in a break. It's like, that's marketing. That's what it is, I think. And, you know, because you're not going to get the people you're not going to see the posts of people who didn't get anything. They entered a $100 break or a $200 break and they didn't really pull anything. Those people they're not going to talk about it. And I think it's interesting. It's a much different thing than what's happened with gambling, because it's like, if you bet something within gambling, and there's almost a culture right now, because of how prevalent gambling has become, that like losing is almost like funny and cool. But it's like, again, I think that there's going to be some drawbacks here because of how much gambling has become legal, and how, I don't know, you know, I've talked about gambling. I think I probably talked about this on a hobby hotline a while ago, with just like, gambling is an addiction. And the fact that one of the main sources within cards that people enjoy is just gambling, you know, breaking boxes and opening, you know, repacks or whatever. Now, if you're going to a retail store, you're not really gambling. Like, I don't know. I don't think those boxes or those products should be, I don't think that those boxes should be viewed the same way that like breakers and people are opening boxes in that scenario. I think that Topps should figure out a better way to include more value in retail boxes, and you know, I would even say in breaks as well. Like, and that's not what Panini has done. Not just include a billion different parallels, like actually figure out a way to bring more value to a collector or somebody opening up a retail box, because that's one of the things that a lot of, like, when it comes to cards and stuff, that's one of the things that I think has a huge staying power within the hobby. Is like, if you think about sports cards, you think about opening packs. So it's like, the fact that maybe hasn't been prioritized from any of these card companies, I think is maybe a big miss, because, and it may even just be that this is what Topps is doing. Like, they're trying to show people that retail is good or whatever. I don't really know. I can't say one way or the other whether it's good, or I can't sit here and say, go out to your local Walmart, go out to your local Target and buy a bunch of retail boxes because you're going to pull something. That's kind of what it was like in the past, like, you know, 5-10 years, you could have, but I think now things have changed pretty significantly. So just the overall sentiment, I think, on social media for myself is like taking things with a grain of salt, but also noticing that Topps has been promoting retail products more, and that a lot of breakers have moved over from box breaks to repacks, and maybe they're not going 100% one way or the other, but the fact that, you know, the fact that people in the community are talking about seeing breakers do more repacks versus doing what their business is, like breaking boxes, I think is very telling for kind of the state of where we're at within sports cards.